Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. And we are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show.
Hello, fabulous porcupines. I am your host and welcome to episode 38 of the Porcupine Report. I am your Queen Quill, your President Emeritus, Carla Gericke, and we have a great guest on the show today. It is my honor to interview the Renegade Statesman, the Senator from Maine, Eric Brakey, who is now in the process of moving to New Hampshire. So welcome, Senator Eric Brakey.
Hi, Carla. Thank you so much for having me on this wonderful show that you have here. 38 episodes. That's a lot of episodes that you've put together.
Right. You know, I've just been here clocking week after week after week. Of course, for the folks who have been watching this regularly, where you have been doing a wonderful job with your Porcupine Report. Let's start with, have you had a favorite guest so far?
Oh, boy, that's a
tricky one.
Isn't that like asking which of your kids are your favorite?
Right. So you should just say I was your favorite guest.
Well, I did let you host my show for an episode, so maybe that does speak to some degree of confidence. Thank you for doing this this week. But no, I've enjoyed. I know Dennis Pratt has been probably the most frequent guest. He's been on 3 times now. I always enjoy when I have Jack Hunter on. By the way, I just booked Jack Hunter again. He's going to be our guest for November 6th, so the day after the election.
Oh, wow, that could be
nice
interesting.
Kind of recap of what the hell just happened, good or bad, or somewhere in between.
Right. Yeah. So, for anyone who hasn't been watching the show, do you want to give us a quick rundown of your bio for the one person who might not know who you are? And then we're going to delve into sort of your move to New Hampshire, what it's looked like for the past year. You've been here almost a year now as our executive director, of course, not full-time initially. We could talk a little bit about what the move looked like and what your process was so that folks who are watching this, who are considering moving to New Hampshire, get a flavor of what that whole thing looks like. So I'm really excited to actually interview you and be like, all right, I'm going to treat you like a new mover and you tell me everything.
The nice part of like having an extended move where it's been like a little bit at a time over the course of almost a year is that like I'm perpetually a new mover. So I always get like all the warm welcomes all the time of being a new mover. It hasn't kind of worn off yet. So, and I think it's been nice too to, as I've been stepping into this role and learning the Free State community to kind of be kind of learning in public, right? Like, doing this show, talking with Free Staters who sometimes know a lot more than me. It'll be interesting when, there are things I don't know or things I'm learning in the process or just on social media, like I was doing for a while. I need to get back to doing that New Hampshire passport thing that you and Dennis Pratt created, like the first things that, things to check off to do as you kind of make your transition, your move to New Hampshire. Though I've done some of those things now and I haven't put them in the passport yet. Like we just did the I'm going to mispronounce it. The Catamangus Highway.
Cagamangus Highway.
All right. However, it's
so some of the pronunciations here are very tricky. I know for myself, I was a little late, and my apologies for that. I was recording my PD Manchester Public Access ad for the election, and I had the questionable choice of saying the word Concord or Concord or however we might say our great fair capital cities' names. So it's always something here in the Free State.
Yeah, this is like the debate in Maine, whether it's Bangor or I guess pretty consistently we pronounce it Bangor in Maine, but out-of-staters will come in and call it Banger or things like
Yeah, I
that.
probably would do that. It's
Yeah, yeah.
also, one of my guilty pleasures is just seeing what my GPS is gonna call something, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, but
So let's talk a little bit about your move. You initially, for 6 months, you were obviously still a senator in Maine, and actually are still under the banner of, or the cloak, perhaps, of your senator role there in Maine. But that'll be petering out after the election,
yeah,
correct?
yeah. Well, the term ends when the next folks are sworn in, and that'll be in December after the
Oh,
election.
wow.
But I really want to cast my first vote in New Hampshire this November. So I've been, between Dover, New Hampshire, and my district, back and forth. I'm probably gonna file to register to vote right before maybe like November 1st or something like that, and then I'll have to kind of issue a resignation from my state Senate seat.
Okay, and of
But
course you can't actually be serving and then have a domicile and legally register
yeah,
and vote here. So it's kind of one or the other. I
yeah,
mean, if
yeah.
you're a Democrat, you probably could, but
There was a whole controversy in Maine where like the Democrat Senate president was like got a home in Augusta that he had filed as his primary residence for getting kind of mortgage assistance or something. And people looked at that and said, wait, this can't be your primary residence because your district is way up north in Aroostook
oh,
County.
wow.
Like, what's going on here? Did you commit mortgage fraud, or are you not eligible to represent your community? Anyway, in that case, the Maine Ethics Commission, which oversees elections and all of that, just said, nothing to see here, move along. So I guess the precedent is you can get away with anything. So I
I mean,
mean,
it does sometimes feel that way, right? That
it,
the
it
rules apply to, us, the plebes, but they don't really apply to the people in power. It's a different set of rules. There's that famous George Orwell book, Animal Farm, where they talk about, some people are more equal than others. And I think our, Congress critters and our elected politicians, that is often the case. But there is also this great thing called the Free State Project and Free Staters. And we're really here to try and sort of change that trend, buck that trend, bring ethics, morals back to politics, maybe get government out of our business, all of that. So, how did you get your start in politics?
Yeah, well, for me, it was, I was always, I guess, somewhat politically interested ever since I was a little kid. I remember very much being in the second grade watching the Bush versus I'm sorry, no, it was Bob Dole versus Bill Clinton in the second grade. I'm sorry,
Oh, wow.
did I make you feel old there? Um,
I
I,
was in law school, I think.
well, I was a second grader, and I was like in my little second grade election. I was casting my vote for Bob Dole, and all my friends said they were going for Bill Clinton. And I remember them telling me that, Bob Dole wants us to have more homework or something. Don't vote for him. Ironically, looking back on it, he was like the last person who ran for president, I guess, until now, who campaigned on, we should get rid of the Department of Education. So I thought kind of that was a little ironic. They thought he wanted to issue us more homework. But in all honesty, I was really only interested in politics like it was, like team sports, like I feel like that it's the way it has become for like a lot of America. And even through like high school, I would get like so passionate, like defending George W. Bush and the war in Iraq and all of these terrible things, because that was my team and the other team was the bad team. And it was just a really bad mentality, but it was very much fueled by, I watched Fox News and I thought that made me informed. The fact that Bill O'Reilly told me what to think every night and Sean Hannity came in for, a little bit of extra to tell me what to think. And it was really the Tea Party wave, 2010, 2011. I was graduating from college, and I read Ron Paul's The Revolution, a Manifesto, and I started thinking, boy, this guy makes a lot of sense. I think he's right about everything except for the wars. We got to be fighting these wars and making the world safe for democracy and all that. That was the hardest thing for me to get past. But eventually it kind of clicked into place. I gave a talk about that at Porc Fest. I don't need to go in all the details there, but it clicked into place. And then I was all in when I graduated from college. I went to New York City. I was working as a professional actor. I was volunteering with the grassroots Ron Paul campaign. And that led to a job opportunity. I went back to Maine, where my family's been for many generations. We took over the whole state Republican Party and fought the establishment at the RNC. And then I ran for state Senate 2 years later. And boy, now that I start to recount it all, I realize how long a story it actually is. But that was the start of the story.
I mean, honestly, for someone who's fairly young for the political arena, you have a impressive resume at this stage, right? I mean, you were one of the youngest. Were you the youngest senator ever?
So not the youngest ever. I was just the youngest. I was 26 when I was elected, so I was the youngest in the country at that moment in time.
Gotcha.
So if you took a snapshot of all the state senators in the country at that moment and you asked who was the youngest, it would have been that guy, Eric Brakey, in Maine. But
so I mean, and maybe you probably do know the answer, but possibly not. Is there an age requirement? I know some positions actually do have. Is that just for president or?
Yeah, I mean, there are. I think every state's different. In Maine, you've got to be 21 to run for the House and 25 to run for the Senate.
Okay, so you just eked right in there.
Yeah. And I think being 20, knowing that I just kind of jumped over that age requirement when I was 30. Which is the requirement you need to be to run for U.S. Senate, and that U.S. Senate seat was there. I think that was maybe part of the impulse. It's like I could be a state senator when I just crossed the age limit. I'm going to go for U.S. Senate now that I'm old enough too. But I'm 36 now, and I haven't run for U.S. president, which is that's the next one, right? You got to be 35.
Well, you know. Maybe someday we'll have some competitive races for president here in the great state of New Hampshire. Who knows?
Right, when New Hampshire's free and independent, right? We'll have
indeed.
our own president.
So, I mean, I guess. Well, I want to stop for just a second and ask you a little bit about that sort of neocon pro-war thing, because I do think that's very interesting to explore how people fundamentally change their mind about something like that. And the reason I ask is it was a big point of contention in our own household. I mean, if I'm feeling ungracious and kind of bratty, I might describe Louis, my husband's position, as kind of neocon when the war started. He had that very, it's gung-ho, we got to get him kind of mentality. And I was definitely coming from the anti-war side. Now, I mean, I've been anti-war since I was like 7 and I read a Wilfred Owen poem, so I just very instinctively had that as a sense of my identity. But was there a moment, or what did you find persuasive? Like, what did that look like? Because we are faced with a challenge today where people are ingesting so much media and they're getting this siloed information, whether it's Fox or CBS or whatever, right? And it's almost like a conditioning. It definitely is propaganda. One might argue it could be mind control, right? This repetitive sort of stuff.
There's definitely an element of mind control. What is it? Mark Twain said, if you don't read the newspapers, you're uninformed, and if you read the newspapers, you're misinformed.
Yeah.
And that certainly, I think, is to a much greater degree the truth today, and I think was much more the truth when I was coming of age, before the era of podcasts and the availability of alternative media like we're participating in right now, where it was really like you got your news from the corporate press. Like that was really the only place that respectable people could get their news. You got it from, and we had so many choices. You had Fox News or CNN or MSNBC. And, it reminds me a lot of, I was listening to a podcast. It was like an NPR podcast where they were talking about Russia and they're talking about narrative control, and they describe these dastardly Russians and how they control the narratives in their country, and they say, even the opposition party is controlled in Russia, right? It's all a carefully choreographed like dance to make people think that, oh, you can believe this one narrative, the main narrative, but for those who are real rebels and don't want to believe the main narrative, they've got a counter narrative that's also a controlled narrative to kind of sweep people up, and so that they're always taking people in the same direction, right? And I just thought, maybe that's true in Russia, I don't know, but boy, as they described it, I just thought that is exactly like what I was captive to as a younger person watching the news. It's like, boy, we saw this all the time, especially on the right. Like, I don't believe this lying liberal media, so I watch Fox News, right? And it's like, it's all steering in the same direction, right? It's all steering us towards war and inflation and centralized government authority. We'll have debates about, which gang should be in charge of the mass murder machine, but never questioning why we have a mass murder machine and why we have the mass currency kind of inflation that goes on. None of the major questions are asked there, but we are kind of put into these kind of political silos, and our emotions are manipulated and our tribal allegiances are manipulated on the basis of that. And of course, it's been, I think, one of the great things about where we are in the 21st century is beginning to break down. They can't control it that way. But yeah, it was, I know I described it in my talk at PorcFest this year. I felt like, looking back on it, I was in a mental prison where I could not even see the things that were right in front of my face because I did not have permission to see them. And for me, it was, as silly as it sounds, it was in the Tea Party, there was that first inkling of like people like a certain kind of permission to like say, boy, maybe the Democrats are bad, but these Republican leaders are pretty bad too. They're bailing out the banks. They're like trampling the Constitution. There's something rotten here. Right. And that's where I could get to the point where, boy, Ron Paul seems to be right about everything except for the wars. Right. I had so internalized that as part of my like identity is support for kind of this war machine that I couldn't allow myself to question that because it threatened my sense of self. And it wasn't until watching the Glenn Beck program back in those days when he was very popular, 5:00 on Fox News in my senior year of college. And he kind of laid out how, if we're going to get serious about cutting spending, we need to put all the sacred cows on the table. And I remember he did a whole week on this. Like one day it was like the Department of Education or, I don't know, various things conservatives would mostly agree with or at least be open to. And they said, but, if we're really going to do this, we got to put all the sacred cows on the table. So let's talk about the defense spending and let's acknowledge that not every penny spent on defense is actually well spent. And I had read like the Revolution. I had read a lot of these arguments against it, but I wouldn't let myself think that until that moment. It was like Glenn Beck gave me permission to question these things. And then suddenly everything kind of clicked into place. And I realized actually war is what Ron Paul was the most right about. And I was afraid to see it. And I think that's always kind of the hard thing I think we're dealing with so many of our fellow Americans is that we are like the most propagandized people in the history of the world. And it's hard to break through those narratives, especially when we internalize them as part of our own identity. And we've argued in favor of terrible things. I mean, I was so vocal in favor of the war in Iraq to acknowledge that I had been wrong about something that serious, where like hundreds of thousands of people died, innocent people, and I was cheerleading for that. That's a hard thing to admit for yourself.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And, we are seeing this sort of dialing up currently with, there's a lot of war going on, Ukraine, we have whatever's happening in the Middle East that, doesn't bode well for anyone, frankly. And I am sensing like this sort of war drum, and I'm sort of seeing it bleed over a little bit into the libertarian sphere as well. I don't know if you agree with that, but there's a lot of sort of chatter about You know, people will argue whether one of the underpinnings of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle, right? And people get confused about what that means. It isn't de facto pacifism. It's not saying there's no room for violence. It's just saying the rules for engagement
Yeah.
should be very clear, and we should only be doing it in
Yeah.
certain
If
circumstances,
we were
right?
pacifists, we wouldn't own so many guns.
Say again.
If we were pacifists, we wouldn't own so many guns.
Right, or perhaps we would, it's
Well,
it's a disincentive, I suppose, to come tread on one if you can defend yourself, which of course is
right,
why the porcupine is our mascot, right? Like
right,
we're
right,
like porcupines are peaceful people, but you don't want to get stabbed by
right.
one.
Well, and that's where I say, like, right, but the pacifist, the true pacifist, wouldn't even use violence for self-defense, right? And so there's no point of having a gun because you're not going to use it. But the non-aggression principle, right? We can, and there'll always be debates about, like, in the margins, like, where does it apply or not, and reasonable people can, there will always be legal cases to be made about if this was a proper application of force or not. But certainly, grounded in the non-aggression principle, right? You can, right, like the porcupine, you use it
Right.
for self-defense, but you don't go looking for a fight.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so shifting gears a little bit. So it sounds like, TV actually changed your mind on war. So that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
I was programmed by the TV, so I needed a little bit of permission to unprogram
Yeah,
myself from the
and
TV.
I mean, to be candid, we do now have the tools. You will hear people like Hillary Clinton, who very recently, in the last 2 weeks, again, well, now they're calling openly for censorship. But, back in 2012, 13, she was talking about we lost the information war, and then they kind of overcorrected. And I think we got a lot of propaganda. And now, because of the decentralization of the inputs, right, there's this mad panic of like, who's getting what information about what is going on. All right, I want to shift gears a little bit because I'm really curious about, first of all, what your impression was of the Free State movement before you lived here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had become aware of the Free State movement. I'm trying to remember if I had been aware of it at all before I came back to Maine on the Ron Paul campaign. But certainly once I was in Maine on the Ron Paul campaign, I became aware of it. And I remember coming to my first Porcupine Freedom Festival in 2012 when it was right after we had kind of won the caucuses and taken over the convention of the Maine Republican Party, but we were going to the national convention and the big fight was looming and they were challenging our delegates and they were going to kick us out. And I remember coming to Porc Fest and doing a radio interview with like the folks with Free Talk Live who were there and just kind of really getting to know, like, it's kind of really great kind of hub of just really great people. I remember getting a copy of, there was someone there who was selling books, and I got a copy that year of Murray Rothbard's The Libertarian Manifesto, and I remember reading that cover to cover, and that had a big impact on me as I was kind of more intellectually developing as a libertarian. But over the years, I kind of felt like it was nice. It was kind of like a nice, healthy competition a little bit, right? I kind of felt like it was fun to tease my friends in New Hampshire as we got as I helped get constitutional carry passed in Maine, and New Hampshire was behind on that regard, and teasing, oh, you guys call yourself the Free State, but we're making all these strides for freedom over in Maine, and what are you guys doing? I kind of felt like there was a nice, healthy competition between our two states of like who can achieve freedom the fastest, and I think that's a good competition to have. What I've seen over time, however, is New Hampshire, I think, is maybe almost kind of a slow and steady wins the race kind of situation where, I was able to get a lot done kind of as an individual person, organizing others, but we didn't really build institutions like have been built in New Hampshire. I mean, New Hampshire has the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance and has AFP, and there are so many organizations that have been built. Whereas in Maine, I'll see like you'll get progress, like people doing stuff for a while, but eventually people have to move on with their lives. You can't do politics forever. And unless you've really built up other people to pass the torch to, those efforts kind of peter out. Well, that doesn't happen in New Hampshire. There's like a never ending, like army of people like ready to pick up the torch and run with it. And so over time, as Maine started to go south and New Hampshire kept growing in freedom, it became clear to me who was winning that race. And what do they say, right? If you can't beat them, join them.
Exactly. I love that. Does Maine have a supermajority now for Democrats or not quite yet?
No, and hopefully never.
Okay. Vermont does now, right? Because someone sent me a meme this morning, and they were pointing out that if you look at the overall tax rate of New Hampshire, of all the states, and of course for our listeners, New Hampshire has no sales tax, it has no personal income tax. From next year, we won't have a dividends and interest tax, which has been tapered to zero thanks to the efforts of liberty-loving people of the great state of New Hampshire. But it had sort of Vermont and Maine both had the highest, I think, other rates. And then New Hampshire was kind of sandwiched in between with this good rate. And, I said, well, I know with Vermont at a minimum, it has a supermajority now. So it makes it incredibly difficult even to hold the line on any budget item.
Yeah. Well, in Maine, so I guess it depends on what you mean by supermajority. Democrats control the House and the Senate and the governorship. So if that's what you mean by supermajority, then yes.
Okay.
But they don't have, when I think of supermajority, I'm primarily thinking of, do they have 2/3
right
in the legislative chambers? And they're close to 2/3 in the Senate. Hopefully they don't win my seat now that I'm stepping away from it, which is a very competitive seat. They could get closer to 2/3 if they pick that seat up, and I hope that doesn't happen. But the House of Representatives in Maine is fairly close. But anytime that they needed 2/3 for anything, since they control all the chambers and they control the rules, they would just find ways to get around the rules and cut Republicans out of the process. So like for the budget, like typically it requires 2/3 in both chambers to pass a budget, but this is what they did, right? They passed the budget as a majority budget, just only Democrat support. And then they adjourned the legislature sine die, right? Which means that it can go into effect from a certain period of time after we adjourn sine die. But we had all this other legislative business to do. So what do? Well, they have the Democratic governor then call us into special session and carry over all of the remaining bills that hadn't been worked with. It's this whole end run around the way it's constitutionally set up, just to cut Republicans out of the decision-making process in terms of the budget. And surprise, surprise, it just came out that the state of Maine now has a $1 billion budget shortfall.
Oh, wow. $1 billion. Was that a B?
Yeah, with a B, yes. Oof. A $1 billion budget shortfall.
Wow.
So
I mean, to put that in context,
I told you so to all the overspenders in Augusta, but I told you so. And it's going to be hard in Maine unless people wake up and make a change there. But I worry about the way kind of the demographics have been shifting in terms of population concentrating in the South and a lot of more progressive people moving in to Portland and the coastal areas. And I haven't lost all hope that Maine could turn around, but and I certainly want to support the efforts of those who are staying in Maine and trying to turn things around. I think a lot of them are doing great work, but
can we talk a little bit about your efforts? I saw a newspaper article maybe a couple of weeks ago, last month. It was the front page of something in Maine, and they were talking about the senator from Maine who wants the CD2 to secede to New Hampshire. Was that sort of, tongue in cheek a little bit, or?
It's funny. I don't mean it tongue in cheek. I mean it as a serious. I mean it as a serious proposal.
I'll take it.
I mean it as a serious proposal that people in the 2nd District should start thinking about a plan B if plan A doesn't work out. And plan A is we're going to keep voting to try to elect a good governor and elect good representatives and a majority that will respect our freedoms and paychecks. And I don't know I don't know if that's possible. I mean, in the long run, I mean, in Maine, the thing to know about Maine is that like it's been a long saying in Maine that there are two Maines. There is kind of northern Maine, and southern Maine, and northern Maine. When I say northern, I really mean like northern
Everything
Maine
but
and down
Portland.
east Maine and western Maine and central Maine, and by southern Maine I mean southern Maine, right? So southern Maine and everything else. And the second district of Maine is the largest congressional district east of the Mississippi.
Oh,
It's a
wow.
district that's voted for Donald Trump twice. But they love their guns. They want the government to leave them alone, and they continually get their teeth kicked in by the progressives who have taken control of state government. And so I don't know. I'm jealous of like the conversations they're having in Oregon and Idaho about Oregon breaking away and joining Idaho. We had on this program several weeks back the executive director of the Greater Idaho Movement, for those folks who are interested in that. I think it's an interesting conversation to have. I think that a change like that probably takes a long time, and I'm just trying to plant the kernel of an idea to get a conversation started. I don't see something like that happening tomorrow. But I do think that the people of the second district of Maine have a lot more in common with the people of New Hampshire, both culturally and politically, than they have in common with the people of the first district of Maine.
Cool. So, I mean, of course, I do a lot of work with Nexit Now and, trying to push that conversation for the same reasons, not because we're just, curmudgeons who want to destroy America, but literally because we are planners and solution driven people who are looking at the can that they have been kicking for almost 100 years now, over 100 years, if you're just looking at, funny money and fiat monetary policy. But, we're looking at what? We're probably close to 40 trillion in debt now.
Yeah.
And it does not seem like anyone has the appetite to make the changes. No, in fact, they're like, hey, let's go make more war. Let's go kill more people. Let's do all this stuff. And then we'll just give away welfare and warfare are two sides, of course, of the same coin. Ron Paul used to say that as well. So it is a appetite to have the conversations and to plant the seeds for things that we hope we'll never need. But perhaps if we do, it would be nice if someone had a plan when the time comes.
Well, and Carla, I will say to you, I know that a lot of people get very sensitive about these conversations about like New Hampshire exit, and personally myself, as you know, I'm more of a 10th Amendment nullification person. I'm not sold on secession from the Union. Be interesting. I think the conversations are interesting to explore. I'm not against it in principle, just maybe from a utilitarian perspective. But in defense of you, you're not the ones destroying America. It's the people racking up $40 trillion in debt who are destroying America, who are making these kinds of conversations necessary to have. I'm glad that
and
the
of course,
conversation.
to the naysayers, I always just say, well, America was born from secession, so
Yeah,
you gotta know your history not to repeat it. And fortunately, here in our movement, a lot of people do know their history, and that is kind of why we're trying to be proactive. Of course, the whole Free State Project as a notion is actually proactive, right? Like it was started almost 20 years ago. The idea was, hey, if we can concentrate all these people together in one place, then maybe we can affect change. And now, of course, we know this is a winning strategy. It is working. New Hampshire is the freest state. It beats Florida, and we don't have hurricanes, blah, blah. So
thank goodness for that.
now that you're here, how's your impression kind of changed with the Free State Project? So you understood the movement from outside.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you're in the thick of things, what does it look like?
Yeah, well, it is an interesting question, right? Because of course, when I was in Maine, my impression of the Free State Project was mostly like going to Porc Fest and Liberty Forum and these big events that the Free State Project does every year. And that was a great sampling. That's a great way to kind of get a taste of what the Free State Project is, but it also misses a lot.
Yeah.
Because since coming here and seeing that, wow, there are like events happening every single day, and the communities, and I'm still getting to know the communities. I haven't gotten a chance. Like, I feel like there's Free State communities that I haven't even gotten a chance to visit and meet with yet. I love the North Country tour I just got to do with the Pratts and meeting all the folks there. I've gotten to know the folks in the Manchester, Merrimack Valley area that you're so involved with, Carla. I'm getting to know the folks in the Seacoast where I'm in the process of moving to. But I also know, like, I haven't gotten out to Keene yet, and I know, like, the Keene the Keene Free Staters are like their own band, their own tribe, and they're doing their own awesome radical stuff with their own style. But I need to get out there and meet with them too. And there are communities across the state I want to put in some more FaceTime with. What's interesting is I kind of been feeling like, especially like on the North Country tour, I like got this feeling. It's like, oh, I've been trying to figure out what is this role I'm trying to embody as the executive director, and I start to realize, in some ways, like, I feel like the Free State communities, all the individual Free Staters are like my constituents that I
Yeah.
need to, like, get out and meet with and recognize that I am in this role. I am representing them on kind of the national stage in terms of, like, being, I know Dennis Pratt has said, like, I get to be like the Secretary of State of the Free State Project, right? I'm trying to go and be the ambassador to the outside world and try to bring some folks in. But so often people are asking me, right, like, where should I move to? And getting to know the different communities in the different regions is so essential to that. So that's still something, and because the communities are so dynamic and always changing, new people are always coming in, and some people are more active at certain points of time, and then they get into a different stage of life, they're doing other stuff, right? The communities are so dynamic and ever changing that I feel like it's, as long as I'm in this role, it's always going to be a process of discovery and getting to know people.
Yeah. So, what did you enjoy most about this North Country tour you guys did?
Yeah, well, of course, New Hampshire is beautiful this time of year. That's to see the leaves changing and all of that. I mean, but you get that in Maine too, to be honest. I mean, that's beautiful. But what you don't get in Maine is the Free State communities. And I was, I mean, we did 7 or 8 events, and
Oh,
everyone was
wow.
incredibly well attended.
Nice.
People were giving great feedback, and we went to this. There was like a harvest festival at this farm. I was just so impressed with how large the Free State community is in the North Country. And I will say, I did hear from folks who in the North Country who do kind of feel maybe a little isolated from the rest of the Free State movement. I mean, geographically, they're up there. It's a bit to travel. So one of the takeaways for me was too that we've got to do some work to kind of build strong bonds between a lot of these regional communities so that we remain connected. Not that we're not just coming together at Porc Fest every year, though that is nice, but that we have a lot more kind of we have a lot more community across our communities.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Of course, we are still quite a small movement in terms of like actual numbers as compared to even the population of New Hampshire, right? So there is a strong argument to be made for unity amongst our constituents, using your word, than leaning into what divides us, right? Like, for the most part, I'm pro saying, we're anti-state. That's really why we're here. We're trying to shrink the size of the state. We're trying to create, healthy communities. Yes, as a byproduct, but as a libertarian, we're kind of here and seeing if we can make everything in New Hampshire more free, maybe attract to more privatization over time and all of that. And part of, it's important to keep an eye on the size of the community and try and create things that do make everyone feel united. So I was really thrilled that you went and did the stuff in the North Country. They have Porc Fest up there. Hopefully, they'll do a hub again and all of that. But um, what has so maybe there's a bit of a trick question, but has there been anything that surprised you so far?
I'm sure there have been. Let me think. What has surprised me? I mean, the universal warm welcome I've received has been
That's
very,
nice.
I don't know, surprising. I mean, it's something you hope for, but you don't you try not to expect. But for the most part, every community in the Free State movement has been very welcoming and eager to give me their thoughts and advice and kind of and good faith criticisms.
Mhm.
Which I do appreciate criticism when it's in good faith, because I'm always trying to learn. I never want to be the person who thinks that they know everything and they have nothing left to learn. Um, uh, and I mean, of course, it's, we all know in liberty communities, and it's true in all communities. There can be infighting, there can be drama, and all of that. And I appreciate uh, that. So far, I feel like I've managed to not not be dragged into all the infighting and drama that goes
Well,
on.
if you continue to wear the sort of diplomatic hat, that should be part of it, right? Like good leaders who want to excel in life understand that you actually have to get on with people you don't like. You have to be able to interact
Yeah,
with them. You have to be able to shake their hand when you got your ass handed to you. And that
yeah,
you learn that with politics, right? Like you're like, oh, I can only be this acrimonious because I have to see this lady again tomorrow. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And so we develop those skills. And so I think you have a very good temperament for this role because of partly your political experience that you bring, right? You're like,
yeah.
okay, I got to work here.
Well, and I remember it, there's a lot of lessons I remember learning when I was younger, in high school and in theater. And I remember our teacher saying to us once, we're there in our theater class with all of our students in our theater ensemble, and we're standing in a circle, and he says, look around the circle at every single person here. There might be people in this circle that you don't like very much. And that's fine. You don't have to like everyone, but you do need to recognize that you need them, right? And I think that as far as our kind of liberty movement goes, there can always be, you know, um, one thing I appreciate is I haven't I've never, this whole time I've never like really looked at anyone and like asked myself, is this person a real libertarian, right? I like I'm I'm I enjoy that there's been very, I haven't been caught up in these kind of libertarian purity tests, and I just kind of look around at people who, hey, you want to build something, you want to contribute, like let's build something together, rather than sitting around saying, oh, is this the kind of person I want to build someone with? What's their opinion on Murray Rothbard versus F.A. Hayek, right? Um, I mean, these things are silly obstacles that get in the way of doing productive things when we're just trying to like be the purest, the biggest, the
Well, I
best.
actually think it's quite a dividing line, right? Between there's a lot of talkers. I mean, people just talk about their ideas and talk about what these other people are doing. And there's a lot of that. But ultimately, it's like, to Pratt's point, it's like, bitch, build, don't bitch,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
It's a good slogan.
it is that, right? Like in the end, it's like, okay, what are you actually
Yeah.
accomplishing?
And that's something I learned a lot. I mean, I'd never heard it summed up in 3 words like that, like Dennis had done. But like, man, I remember the early days in Maine politics, like, after just winning, after the 2012 Ron Paul campaign and going to the state senate, I had a lot of ankle biters like after me. People were like, oh, he's not a real libertarian, or he's just in it for himself, or this or that, and like whatever. Like, you got to just like tune these people out, particularly when it's on social media, right? If people are coming at you, if people are being trolls, oftentimes they want negative attention. And the last thing you want to do is kind of go into that and try to defend yourself and try to like fight back, because you're just giving them what they want. You're adding fuel to the fire there. And I've learned, like, just let the bitchers bitch, and let the builders build. And if
Right.
you and if someone is doing something different than how you think it should be done, then go and build something the way you think it should be done. And when your model succeeds, other people will follow you and emulate you. And the people who are standing around bitching will still be exactly where they were, on the sidelines doing nothing.
So tell folks kind of what's coming up for you in terms of maybe from now till the end of the year, I know you have some, podcasts coming up. You have some travel coming up. We'll probably have the volunteer party at some stage. We kind of get to the end of the year, some of the fundraising stuff. Let us know what is kind of coming down the pike for the Free State Project in the next couple of months.
Yeah, well, a few things. Well, first of all, you mentioned the volunteer party. That was one of the greatest surprises when it was coming. My very first day on the job is the volunteer appreciation party that you and Chris Lopez, and I'm sure there were others involved in putting that together. And the huge warm welcome I received from day one from
Well, really, it was that whole sea of volunteers. We had almost
yeah,
100 people. A lot of people don't fully understand. Certainly, I don't think our donors do, that a lot of the work that's been done over 20 years is literally just human action. It's people power. And
yeah.
now we have this incredible opportunity with you full time to really take it to 2.0, right? So the volunteers are there to help.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that was great, and we're definitely want to do a volunteer appreciation dinner again for everyone who's been helping out over the course of this past year. So I know we're just in the early stages of talking about that, most likely in December. We're also getting ready to launch, and I'll guess maybe just give people a little bit of a sneak
Little
peek.
taste.
We haven't launched it or announced it yet, but we are going to be launching a new initiative in the near future. We're going to be announcing it shortly after the elections because everyone's focused on the elections right now. We're going to hold our fire to announce our big plans until shortly after. But some new initiatives that are going to really be focused on how we step up our recruiting efforts for recruiting the best, the brightest builders from the Liberty Movement to come and build in New Hampshire, how we help support the growth and the vibrancy of our Free State community here in New Hampshire, and also how we do a lot more in the realm of content production. I think that this show so far has been a big success. I've really appreciated seeing just doing it regularly every Wednesday, releasing a new episode at 7 o'clock, seeing that every week the audience is building larger, and it's been so nice to see as I go around the state getting feedback from people who are watching. I'd love for the Free State Project to do a lot more in the realm of content production, not just stuff that features me, but stuff that features many different voices from within our movement.
Yeah, because we forget sometimes, but the FSP is an educational nonprofit, right? Like we are actually here to educate people about the benefits of living free in the great state of New Hampshire. And so it's like, yeah, we should have content. We should one day we're gonna have our own little broadcast station and all of it. I mean,
I
we're starting to do it slowly. And for listeners and viewers, there's a lot of really fascinating
yeah.
content on the Free State Project on the YouTube channel. And of course, there are things like the NBC documentary. There are little mini documentaries that have been made about Porc Fest over the years.
Yeah.
Don't believe everything you hear. It's not half as wild as I make it sound when people ask me questions. I say all the normal things, and then there's one little sentence that sounds wild, and that's the only thing that makes it to a soundbite. Right?
And of course, the producer for this show, who is watching from behind the scenes right now, Renita, is producing this amazing documentary on the Free State movement, which I've gotten to use little sneak preview clips at a lot of different events, including when you and I were presenting about the Free State Project at Freedom Fest. So I'm looking forward to, as that project comes closer to fruition, even just the little clips that have been out have been wonderful.
Well, can you tell folks about a couple? I know you mentioned Jack Hunter, some upcoming guests that will be on Porcupine Report, and then maybe a couple of places where you'll be appearing. I think you're going to Texas, maybe?
Yeah, I'm going down to Texas to do a podcast called the Looking Forward podcast, I believe it's called. I'm told it's a big show. I'm not too familiar with it. I did listen to an episode that Connor Boyack, who was the author of the Tuttle Twins, was on, and I did appreciate, for Connor Boyack, if you watch the show, I did appreciate the shout out you gave to Porc Fest during your interview there. So yeah, that'll be happening next month, shortly after the election. So I'll be going down for that. On this show, I know I'm excited. For the first time on this show, though I've interviewed him in the past on my past programs, Andrew Heaton will be joining us in the coming weeks. Tom Woods will be joining us at some point. we're going to have him on earlier, but he had to reschedule to do an interview with Candace
Oh, he
Owens.
bumped you for who
Yeah,
was it? For Candace
Candace
Owens.
Owens. Well, you know,
Yeah, I mean that's a legit bump. It's
we all
kind of
know.
like the time I got bumped from CNN for a school shooting. I was like, damn it.
Well, you know, yeah, it's for the kids.
Actually, speaking about Tom, we should give a shout out. He's doing one of his murder mysteries here in the Boston area, I believe on October 23rd.
Yeah, 1 week from today. So actually, when the next Porcupine Report episode airs next week, we'll have pre-recorded it. I'll be there. Are you going to that?
Mm-hmm.
All
yeah,
right.
I'm a character. Louis is a character.
I'm a character.
We're in it to win it.
All right. Well, so when the next episode airs, you and I will be solving a murder mystery at a mansion in Massachusetts. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to that. We've done some over the years here. In fact, we did it as a fundraiser probably 10, 15 years ago now. I'm looking at one of the photos behind me where we're all dressed in, 1930s, long cigarettes and the boas and all of that. So it is always a fun time. And, it's always great to see Tom, who's been an incredible supporter of us over the years.
And he's moving to the Free State.
Who will move one day once the kids are big.
Yeah, he says he is.
So anything else you think folks should know? I mean, I know we've been kind of all over the place, but
that's the way this show goes. That's why I call them free range conversations. You let them range wherever they go. Let it be grade A organic conversations. Let's see. Other things that are coming up. So yeah, we gave a little sneak peek to some initiatives we'll be announcing after the election. Talk about volunteer appreciation. Of course, we've got, I know you'll be organizing Porcupine Day. By the way, I did notice, does it usually happen Porcupine Day is the same week as Groundhog Day? I noticed.
I did notice that 2 years ago as well. And I was just like, okay, this is too weird to like deal with it. Although I did think it would be fun to do like a skit with a porcupine.
Porcupine, just move over, Groundhog. This is my day.
Whether you get pricked or not is whether it's going to be eternal winter or eternal statism.
Yeah, nobody's reaching into the burrow to pull out the porcupine to see if he sees his shadow. It's you don't want to grab the porcupine. That's not going to end well.
No, probably not. We of course have Porcupine Day, which will be on February 3rd. I'm kind of figuring out the lay of the land for that one. Based on some of your feedback, I was like, oh, let me try and see if we can do it somewhere else to kind of make it a little more accessible to other people coming from other parts of the state. So I'm going to be putting that in motion. And then, of course, we have Liberty Forum next year and Porc Fest. How about you just tell folks so that they can go mark their calendars right now so that they don't go, oh, gee, I forgot Porc Fest is next week. I wanted to come.
So all right. So we got Porcupine Day on February 3rd. Let me I'm looking.
And Porcupine Day, for folks who don't know, was the day that we announced that we had triggered the move. So we'd reached the 20,000 signers. I believe Liberty Forum, if I can help you out here.
I got it. I got it right here in my planner.
27th to the 29th.
And then it's the 24th to the 26th.
Say again?
April, New Hampshire Liberty Forum is April 24th through the 27th, but the meat and potatoes are on Friday.
It's in the middle of the week?
No, unless it's Thursday through Sunday.
Oh, okay. I have different dates on my board, but that's not to say I'm not wrong.
Anyway, either way, it's on the weekend. It's
sometime in April, late April, and then of course Porc Fest is always the third week in June. It's always a good time. It is a very fantastic way to come meet the community. And here is one reality for folks back home. People who visit invariably move. It's really hard once you get here and you're kind of on the ground and you see what people are doing and you meet people who have shared values. It really does become, oh, wow, how can I get there? What can I do? So how about any last thoughts, last words before we wrap up for this week?
Well, Carla, as you know, I am not a fan of the Federal Reserve Bank. And I do believe it should be destroyed. That's my final word.
Well, on that note against fiat, we will be wrapping up. I wanted to thank our technical producer, Rainita, for her help, of course, in making this. And if you can, go to freestatedoc.com or org, sorry.
FSP.org, right?
To support her efforts with the documentary.
Oh, the documentary, yes.
Yeah, and then for anyone who wants to learn more about the Free State Project and the wonderful project and things we are doing up here, your best bet is fsp.org. If you want to know what's coming up this week, fsp.org/calendar. We make an effort to keep that updated. It will tell you what's happening in the state. There's always something going on. Reach out to Chris Lopez at any time. She wants to help you connect with more of the community. And I guess as a final note from me, if you hate the Federal Reserve and think it should go away, I'm just going to say my opinion is let's keep New Hampshire awesome.